Most people die once, but not Dorothy Eady, who died thrice. Once when she was 3 years old, once of old age, and once in her past life. For most people, falling down a set of stairs and being pronounced dead would be the end of things. But for Dorothy Eady, it was just the beginning. The story goes something like this. Dorothy was playing in her room when she decided that she needed to go talk to her parents. But on the way, she tripped and fell down an entire flight of stairs. Her parents heard a crash, and when they came to investigate, they found their daughter not moving. They immediately called a doctor who came to the house and checked up on her. There he told the parents that she was dead. After a few minutes of grief, her parents and the doctor went into the other room where they started to discuss what could be done now and possible funeral arrangements. But then they heard noises. They went to check on it and found Dorothy had gone back to playing with her toys, like nothing had ever happened. It was a miracle, a joyous occasion. The parents quickly grabbed her and talked to her, asking her if she was all right. She was, and she responded she was fine, but her parents were shocked. Dorothy was replying to them in a weird foreign accent that they had never heard before, and all she told them was that she wanted to go back home. When her parents told her that she was home, she got depressed and argued with them that she wasn't. For days, this was what she kept clamoring about, saying she needed to go home. Her parents didn't know what home she was talking about to begin with. One fateful day, the family went to a British museum, just a nice family outing. They went to the Egyptian section, where they saw a painting of the New Kingdom Temple of Seti I. As soon as Dorothy saw this, and saw how everywhere in the Egyptian section was about Egyptian culture, she began to cry tears of joy and said, "This is my home." She was so adamant about Egypt being her home, and she was as happy as if she was in Disneyland. To Dorothy, she was home, and as it would turn out, she was right. Her home truly was Egypt, but not 2024 Egypt or 1930 Egypt. It was the Egypt where Pharaoh Seti I ruled in 1290 to 1279 BC. Reincarnation has always been a topic of great discussion, and as time goes by, more and more cases have come up of children having memories from their past lives and being able to give information that no one should have known. Take the case of Sam, who was not even 2 years old when he told his father that he had changed his own father's diapers. Apparently, the boy believed that he was the spirit of his deceased grandfather. When asked how he came back, he responded by saying, "I just went whoosh and came out the portal." They also asked Sam if he had any siblings, and he replied that he had a sister who turned into a fish. Who turned her into a fish? Some bad guys. She died. Eerily enough, Sam's grandfather had a sister who had been murdered 60 years earlier. Her body was found floating in San Francisco Bay. Ron and Kathy then gently asked Sam, "Do you know how you died?" Sam jerked back and slapped the top of his head, as if in pain. 1 year before Sam was born, his grandfather had died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Or take the case of Ryan. A few years ago, the 4-year-old woke up screaming at 2 in the morning. Over the preceding months, he'd been pleading with his bewildered mother, Cindy, to take him to the house where he'd lived before. In tears, he'd beg her to return him to his glittering life in Hollywood, complete with a big house, a pool, and fast cars that was so fabulous. He was so sure that this wasn't his home and that he had a house in Hollywood. His mother had never seen her son like this, and even though she wanted to dismiss it, in her gut, she knew something was up. The next morning, she went to the library, borrowed a pile of books about old Hollywood, and brought them home. With Ryan in her lap, Cindy went through the volumes. She was hoping the pictures might soothe him. Instead, he became more and more excited as they looked at one particular book. When they came to a still of a scene from a 1932 movie called Night After Night, he stopped her. "Mama," he shouted, pointing to one of the actors who wasn't identified. "That guy's me, the old me." The actor he pointed out was Marty Martin, who did in fact live in a big house with a pool, fast cars, and so much more. Later on, when his family got into contact with Marty's family, they found that Ryan got more than 50 individual things correct about his supposed past life. However, there are a few things that make Dorothy's case much more special than Ryan's or Sam's case. Normally, memories of past lives begin around the age of 2 or 3 and gradually fade away as you get older around the age of 5. But in Dorothy's case, the memories didn't fade away. In fact, as time went on, Dorothy started to remember more and more of her past life. This obviously caused a lot of problems. For example, Dorothy was kicked out of Sunday school because she would often disagree with the teacher, as she would compare Christianity to ancient Egyptian religion and even refuse to sing a hymn that condemned Egyptians. She would also take every opportunity she could find to go and spend time at the British Museum, specifically the Egyptian section where she would stare at the photographs of the areas she claimed to be from. In such, on her first ever trip to the museum, she kissed the feet of all the statues of the deities to show her respect. Of course, it was an embarrassment to her parents. Eventually, on one of her visits to the museum, she bumped into Wallace Budge, who was taken by her enthusiasm for Egyptian culture and encouraged her to study hieroglyphics. From here on out, Dorothy would spend a lot of time working to be closer to her past. She joined a theater group for a couple of years, which would do plays based on Egyptian mythology. Around the age of 27, she joined an Egyptian public relations magazine, where she would write articles that showed her support for a completely independent Egypt. There, she also met Imam Abdel Megued, an Egyptian student who she would start a relationship with. A couple of months later, the two married, and Imam would go back to Egypt as a teacher of English, with Dorothy following behind. On arriving to Egypt, she kissed the ground and announced she had come home to stay. From there, she enjoyed an idyllic few years with her husband, and they even had a son together who she named Seti, in honor of, you guessed right, Seti. But throughout this time, she was constantly plagued with visions of old people she knew, and she was frequently having an out-of-body experience. While most of these visions didn't make a lot of sense, there was one entity that would frequently appear in her dreams, named Hora. Hora explained to her that he was the spirit of Seti I, the ruler of Egypt during the time that Dorothy claimed to be alive. For a year, Hora slowly dictated the entire history of her previous life, which was written down by Dorothy in 70 pages of hieroglyphic text, and it was finally the answer and the closure she needed to know who she truly was. In her previous life, Dorothy had been a young woman named Bentreshyt with a humble origin and poor upbringing. Her mother was a vegetable seller and her father was a soldier. But when she was just 3 years old, her mother died and she was placed in the temple of Kam el-Sultan because her father didn't have enough money to take care of her. There, she was brought up to be a priestess, and once she was 12 years old, the high priestess asked her to make a choice. Either she tries living or surviving on her own outside the temple, or she could stay at the temple and become a consecrated virgin, only and solely devoting herself to worship. Since she was still a kid, she didn't really understand the full meaning of what she was doing and agreed to become a consecrated virgin. Plus, who would take care of her if she was to choose the first option? This was mostly the only home she ever knew, so the second option seemed better. Fast forward a couple of years and she's all grown up. One day, she met the ruler himself, Seti I, and they hit it off immediately. They quickly became lovers and ate the uncooked goose, which is an Egyptian metaphor for bow chicka wow wow, aka sex. When Bentreshyt became pregnant and couldn't hide it, she told the high priest who the father was. The high priest informed her that the gravity of the offense against Isis was so terrible that death would be the most likely penalty at a trial, but that would also bring scandal and shame to Seti. Not wanting to scandalize Seti I, she took her own life instead of facing the trial. As she learned all this, her obsession with her past home grew. She finally knew who she was. She started reading up more and more about Egyptian culture and was soon working with some of the best in the field. Despite her unconventional background, Dorothy's vast knowledge of ancient Egyptian culture and history earned her respect in academic circles. Selim Hassan, a highly respected Egyptian archaeologist, was one of the first scholars to recognize Dorothy's capabilities. She worked alongside him during his excavations at Giza, assisting in the documentation and analysis of ancient artifacts and inscriptions. Dorothy's ability to read hieroglyphics and her deep familiarity with Egyptian customs proved invaluable to Hassan's work. Her contributions were especially important in interpreting the religious and cultural significance of the artifacts they uncovered, many of which she claimed to recognize from her past life. Although her mystical beliefs were not widely accepted by the academic community, Hassan valued her practical skills and dedication. Ahmed Fakhri, another esteemed Egyptologist, further solidified Dorothy's place in Egyptology. Fakhri, known for his extensive work in the Western Desert and his research on the pyramids, worked with Dorothy during his excavations at Dashur and the Bahariya Oasis. Her meticulous attention to detail and ability to identify important historical information enhanced Fakhri's research, particularly in understanding the connections between the artifacts and the ancient Egyptian belief system. While their professional relationship was grounded in scholarly work, Fakhri, like Hassan, could not help but be intrigued by Dorothy's unique perspective on ancient Egypt. He even went as far as to extend her a special thanks when he wrote his magnum opus, Excavations at Egypt. She learned from these scholars the techniques of archaeology, while they benefited from her expertise in hieroglyphics and drawing. Eventually, though, the work Fakhri was doing was completed, which meant that she was now out of a job. In their last meeting, Fakhri gave Dorothy the choice to either take a high-paying, cushy job at the Cairo Records Office or a poorly paid position at an excavation site of her previous home, Abydos. With no hesitation, she chose the former and packed her bags. She reported that Seti I approved of the move. He claimed that the wheel of fate was turning and this would be a time of testing. If she was chaste, she would undo the ancient sin of Bentreshyt dictated to her by Horah. But while she was doing amazingly well in her professional life, her life at home was falling apart. By this time, she had completely separated from her husband, and the two were not on talking terms. Her son was still living with her, and throughout her work she had made a lot of acquaintances, but most of her time was still spent studying ancient texts or talking to Horah in her dreams. However, that did come with its benefits. Soon after she arrived to Abydos, one of the chief inspectors from the Antiquities Department, who had heard of her claims, decided to test her. He asked her to stand in complete darkness near some wall paintings and describe what was depicted as she remembered in her old life. Surprisingly enough, she was able to describe the paintings in perfect detail, even though she had never been there in her life, or in this case, in this life. She spent the first 2 years at Abydos listing and translating pieces from a recently excavated temple palace. She also received a lot of fame for describing a garden in which she used to play as a child in her previous life, when the same garden was discovered in the exact location that she said it would be. Remember, she had not even been in Egypt until she moved with her divorced husband, so knowing things that even archaeologists who spent their lives and resources digging didn't know was very impressive. She also had a lot of revelations about ancient Egyptian culture because of her connection to Seti I. She described the Temple of Seti as like entering a time machine where the past becomes the present and the modern mind has difficulty understanding a world in which magic is accepted. She claimed that the scenes depicted on the temple walls were active in the minds of ancient Egyptians on 2 levels. Firstly, they made the actions displayed permanent. The painting of Pharaoh offering bread to Osiris, for example, continued his actions so long as the depiction remained. Secondly, the image could be animated by the spirit of the god if the person stood before the depiction and called on the god's name. On reaching the age of 60 in 1964, Dorothy was forced with mandatory retirement by the Antiquities Department and advised to seek part-time work in Cairo. She went to Cairo but only stayed 1 day before returning to Abydos and pleading with the department to let her stay on for longer. The Antiquities Department decided to make an exception to their retirement age rules and allowed her to continue her work at Abydos for a further 5 years until she retired in 1969. Her pension of $30 per month was supplemented by needlework sold to friends and tourists who also brought gifts of clothes, food, and reading materials. But even this wouldn't stop Dorothy, and she began work as a part-time consultant for the Antiquities Department, guiding tourists around the Temple of Seti and explaining the symbolism of the painted wall scenes. In 1972, she suffered a mild heart attack, and in the aftermath, decided to sell her old house and move into a zerebra, which is a ramshackle single room made of reeds. Ahmed Soliman, the son of the one-time keeper of the Temple of Seti, built a simple mud brick house adjacent to his family home where Seti moved and lived as part of the Solomon family. She reported in her diary that on first moving into her new home, Seti I appeared and carried out a ritual that consecrated the habitation, bowing reverently towards small statues of Osiris and Isis she kept in a small shrine niche. Before she died, though, Dorothy had one last secret up her sleeve. She believed that she knew the location where Nefertiti was buried, but showed some reluctance in disclosing its most unlikely place, because Seti I did not like Akhenaten for his attempt to suppress traditional Egyptian religious practices. She believed that giving away the location would anger Seti I, and as a result, kept it a secret for a long time. Eventually, though, she described the location of the tomb as being close to Tutankhamun's, which was counter to the then prevailing opinion that no new tombs would be found in the Valley of the Kings. While the exact tomb has not yet been found, Dorothy was completely correct that there are more tombs to be found in the Valley of the Kings, and there are currently 2 anomalies which are believed to be undisturbed tombs as of now. Maybe in the future, once those tombs are explored, Dorothy's claim might be proven true. Despite all her contributions to Egyptology, many locals still feared her, and she knew that no Christian or Muslim cemetery would accept her because of her beliefs. She tried to construct a tomb in her back garden, but was denied at the last minute when health officials insisted she be given a proper burial. Eventually, a local Coptic cemetery gave in, granting her an unwanted plot of land in the desert, but with no grave marker, only a pile of stones. That anonymous burial after her death at age 77 in 1981 marked an unceremonious end to a long and unusual life filled with both grand achievements and social and religious isolation. And with that, Dorothy Eady, Seti, or Bentreshyt had died for the second time. So, what's the final verdict? Was she actually the reincarnated spirit of Bentreshyt, or did she make it all up? Looking at it, there are a lot of things that point to her telling the truth. For one, she was an archaeological genius and directed successful digs from memory, not from records or from connecting the dots, but from memory without any aid. I already mentioned the famous example where she was brought into the temple pitch black for the first time and described the carvings there without seeing them ever, at least not as Dorothy Eady. It was also because of her that they found the garden, among many other locations. Within 2 years at Abydos, she more or less led every dig there. She's also considered one of the biggest historical experts on Ramses II, and she claims she got all of her knowledge from hitting up Seti I for answers about his kid. Moreover, she went against the contemporary belief of most historians of her time, who used the Bible as their primary reference. She even went as far as to say that everything written about Ramses II in the Bible were complete lies. And she was later proved right when archaeological evidence was dug up in Luxor supporting her theories. However, the question remains, how did a woman from a destitute home in England become one of the most prolific editors of hieroglyphics and traditional Egyptian culture in the space of 4 years of moving to Egypt? Even weirder, a lot of her papers were on taking the mystery out of traditional Islamic folk healing in the region and creating sound theories on their origin in ancient Egyptian rites. By all accounts, she's a beloved anthropologist, and while most of the people she worked with didn't believe in her reincarnation story, they definitely agreed that she was remarkable when it came to ancient Egyptian culture. After her death, James P. Allen, who has served as the president of the International Association of Egyptologists, wrote that, "Sometimes you weren't sure whether Seti was pulling your leg. Not that she was a phony in what she said or believed, she was absolutely not a con artist. But she knew that some people looked on her as a crackpot, so she kind of fed into that notion and let you go either way with it. She believed enough to make it spooky, and it made you doubt your own sense of reality sometimes." Carl Sagan, who needs no introduction, considered Dorothy to be a lively, intelligent, dedicated woman who made real contributions to Egyptology. This is true whether her belief in reincarnation is fact or fantasy. Despite her achievements, most people don't believe her or her claims. While everyone agrees that she had an uncanny intuition when it came to her field of study, a lot of people believe that it was due to just being really talented when it came to her work, and not because of a deity visiting her in her dreams. Over the years, a lot of psychologists have tried to figure out whether she had mental issues, and a lot of people believe that she suffered from a really severe case of obsessive-compulsive disorder, better known as OCD. A person suffering from OCD gets obsessed with a particular idea. In Dorothy's case, it was the idea that she had been reincarnated, and as a result, might lose touch with reality. They also believe that her fall might have caused damage to the areas of her brain that help us determine what is real and what is imaginary, making her obsessions even worse. Critics believe that a severe obsession, started around the age of 4 or 5, could have led her to study so much about Egyptian culture and Seti I that she developed a sort of sixth sense when it came to her work, and this might have been the reason behind her amazing feats. One last thing to consider here is the fact that for a lot of information, such as her fall, going to the museum for the first time, and even the famous experiment where she was able to tell the paintings in the dark from memory, were all anecdotes and have very little evidence to back them up. And while she did get most archaeological sites and artifacts right, she did also get some wrong. But to be frank, her story is one that surpasses logic. This wasn't an alien story where the only witnesses are the ones that were abducted, or a skinwalker story where the only thing we have for proof is just one blurry image. Her story was experienced by hundreds, if not thousands of people, and everyone agreed that she was not ordinary. We have proof of the excavation and findings she led. If that's not proof of the extraordinary, I don't know what else is. So, reincarnation or pure coincidence? That is up to you to figure out. But if you enjoyed this story, then you would love to know more about the time traveler who predicted the future and everything he said came true. Alright, 2 things to note here. Successful time travel has been invented in the future, and some dude was claiming to be from said future. One big difference. Time claimed the future had drastically changed from what we know now, and these changes were severe.
Time travelers keep a low profile for a reason. You can't travel forward in time without an invitation from the future. You don't alter history, and can only influence events just like anyone else. It's ironic that people worry about time travelers disrupting their timeline when they make choices every day that shape their world. My goal isn't to convince you. Most people don't take well to news of upcoming wars, but they often accept it as inevitable. History shows that innovation and progress often emerge during times of conflict, driven by the desire to develop new ways to harm each other.
Click on the video you see on screen if you want to learn more about it. And as always, thanks for watching.